Today we're counting up the 15 British winter dinners that once defined life in the 1950s through the 1970s, but have nearly vanished from supermarket shelves today. These dishes aren't just recipes, they're a timeline of post-war austerity, when meals were built from scraps, ingenuity, and pounds, shillings, and pence. From hearty stews born of cheap cuts to thrifty desserts that transformed leftovers into family treats. Each entry reveals how scarcity, creativity, and shifting tastes shaped what got served on cold, dark evenings. Some dinners you'll remember instantly, others might surprise you for how utterly they've disappeared. Which forgotten staple claims pride of place? Let's begin, starting with a dish that warmed countless northern kitchens. Number 1. Beef stew with root vegetables stood as the backbone of winter suppers across Britain's industrial north. Its aroma, a blend of simmering meat and earth, seeped into the walls of terrace houses and lingered long after the last bowl was scraped clean. Housewives turned to shin or scrag end of beef, the cheapest cuts costing under 2 shillings per pound in 1952, and coaxed them into tenderness with hours of slow bubbling on the stove. Carrots, swede, and onions joined the pot, each vegetable sliced to stretch the scant meat further. Potatoes, nearly £4 per person weekly in northern households, according to the 1951 National Food Survey, gave the stew its body and bulk, soaking up every drop of savory broth. Children learned to fish for the softest potatoes first, their surfaces stained brown with beef juices, while fathers ladled steaming mugs after long shifts in shipyards or textile mills. In kitchens where money ran thin and winter pressed hard against the glass, this stew meant comfort and endurance. It was never just a meal, but a ritual of thrift and patience, anchoring families through damp kitchens, thin wallets, and winters when frost crept across the inside of windows. In second place, dumplings stood as Britain's answer to persistent hunger and thin winter stews. Made from flour and suet, both costing only pennies per pound in the early 1950s, these pale, hefty balls were dropped into bubbling pots just as the broth began to look too watery to satisfy. Suet, a fat rendered from beef or mutton, became the backbone of household cookery, with the average family using about half a pound each week by 1953. Housewives would mix suet with flour and a splash of water, forming dough that swelled and softened as it simmered, soaking up every ounce of flavor from the pot. The result was a dumpling that turned a meager stew into a filling supper, stretching scant meat further and ensuring no one left the table hungry. Fathers relished the extra weight in their bowls, while children learned to break open each dumpling, letting the steam rise and the juices spill out. Oral histories recall dumplings as the difference between a meal that merely warmed and one that truly filled. In homes where the memory of rationing lingered, these suet-laden orbs became a symbol of thrift and ingenuity, proof that even the humblest ingredients could offer real comfort on the coldest nights. Third on our list, Lancashire hotpot brought regional pride to the winter table, a dish woven tightly into the routines of mill towns and the rhythms of northern family life. Layered in heavy enamel pots, thick slices of potato, onions, and carrots formed a blanket over mutton, chosen not for luxury, but for thrift, with a pound costing just 1 shilling and 8 pence in 1952. In homes where pay packets were never guaranteed, hotpot became a strategy as much as a meal. Housewives stretched scant meat thin, trusting slow baking to coax flavor into every bite, while the potato crust, browned and crackling under a serving spoon, promised both comfort and sustenance. Northern households consumed 40% more potatoes per week than their southern counterparts, a reflection of both climate and necessity. Memories linger of Sunday kitchens, steam fogging the windows, and the first crack of the crust releasing a rush of savory aroma. Children waited for the corner pieces, crisp and golden, while fathers took the heartier middle, heavy with juices. Lancashire hotpot was more than a recipe. It was a badge of endurance and ingenuity, proof that even in the coldest months, community and tradition could turn humble ingredients into something worth gathering for. Number 4, Bubble and Squeak brought the sound of thrift straight to the breakfast table. Its name captured the sizzle of leftover potatoes and cabbage frying in a heavy pan. A simple melody echoing through kitchens on Monday mornings. Potatoes, selling for just 4 pence per pound in the early 1950s, made up the bulk of the dish. Softened scraps from Sunday's roast, pressed flat and browned until the edges crisped. Cabbage joined in, its faint bitterness mellowed by frying, and sometimes a stray carrot or bit of cold meat found its way in too. Ministry of Food pamphlets, especially the wartime Food Facts series, urged housewives to waste nothing, holding up Bubble and Squeak as a patriotic answer to rationing's demands. Issue number 57 described it as a good and filling meal for any family, showing how official advice shaped daily habits. In practice, Bubble and Squeak required no special recipe, just a practiced hand and a willingness to see potential in scraps. Children sometimes grumbled at the repetition, but the golden crust and savory aroma offered comfort, especially on grey mornings when the larder ran thin. For many, the dish stood as proof that nothing in a British kitchen need go to waste, turning yesterday's leftovers into today's sustenance with little more than a knob of fat and a hot pan. In the memory of post-war winters, Bubble and Squeak remains a badge of resourcefulness, its cheerful noise a reminder of making do and making it last. Number 5. Toad in the Hole offered a solution for families faced with shrinking meat rations and growing appetites. Sausages, once a luxury, by 1962 reached an average of 1.5 pounds per person each week, according to the National Food Survey, became the star, but not in isolation. A shallow tin, a slick of dripping, and a batter of flour, eggs, and milk transformed a few links into a meal for 6. The magic was in the rise. 20 minutes in a hot oven, and the batter ballooned around the sausages, golden at the edges, soft and custardy inside. At home, the dish was a Sunday treat. Children waited for the first slice, the aroma of sizzling pork and eggy crust promising comfort on cold evenings. Yet in school canteens, Toad in the Hole took on a different reputation. Oral histories recall trays of pale, rubbery batter and sausages that seemed more gristle than meat, served in portions that cooled before they reached the table. The dish became a dividing line, beloved at home, dreaded in institutional settings. Still, the strategy endured, stretching modest sausage portions with a cheap, filling batter, echoing the broader pattern of thrift that defined the era. For many, Toad in the Hole was both a memory of family warmth and a reminder of the inventive ways British kitchens met the challenge of winter scarcity. Number 6. Corned beef hash brought the world to the British dinner table, 1 tin at a time. The sharp scent of onions frying in a shallow pan signaled the start, followed by the heavy, metallic clunk of Argentine corned beef sliding from its can. Housewives diced the pink meat, costing 2 shillings and 4 pence per pound in the early 1950s, and tossed it with chopped potatoes, stretching the mixture to feed hungry mouths. The hash would sizzle until the edges crisped, filling kitchens with a smell that clung to curtains and coats. Britain imported over 200,000 tons of corned beef every year during this period, a figure that dwarfed homegrown beef and revealed just how reliant working-class families had become on global trade for affordable protein. National Food Survey figures from 1953 recorded 65% of low-income households eating tinned corned beef weekly, not out of preference, but necessity. Children wrinkled noses at its salty tang. Fathers asked for extra gravy to soften its dryness. and mothers prized the long shelf life that made it a reliable fallback when fresh meat ran out. Corned beef hash marked a shift in British winter dinners, from the local and fresh to the imported and preserved, tying the fate of post-war kitchens to distant South American pastures. In the collective memory, it remains a dish of compromise and endurance, its aroma forever linked to the effort to keep plates full through the hardest months. Number 7. Pea soup and peas pudding brought warmth and quiet pride to the winter table, especially in regions where meat was scarce and pennies were counted twice. The thick green ladlefuls, sometimes so dense they barely rippled, owed their substance to dried marrow-fat peas, a staple promoted by Ministry of Food advisors and radio kitchen front talks throughout the 1950s. Households averaged 12 ounces of dried peas each week, a figure confirmed by National Food Survey records, making them one of the most reliable sources of affordable protein outside the butcher's counter. In the Northeast, the ritual pairing of peas pudding with Savoy sausages or slices of ham became a marker of local identity. The pudding, slow-cooked until it held its shape, spread thickly on bread or alongside boiled meats. Kitchens filled with the earthy scent of simmering pulses, a comfort that reached deep into the coldest months. For many, the dish was a lesson in thrift. Peas cost only a few pence per pound, and bulked out meals when wages or rations ran short. Mothers stirred pots for hours, coaxing softness from the peas, while children debated whether the soup or the pudding offered more comfort. Official guidance praised their nutritional value, but the memory that endures is sociability, a steaming bowl shared on market days, or a slab of peas pudding passed around the table. In a landscape shaped by austerity, pea soup and peas pudding stood as quiet proof that plant-based thrift could nourish both body and community, long after the last winter frost had faded. In 8th place, bread and dripping stood as both a comfort and a quiet mark of hardship in post-war British kitchens. The ritual began with a thick slice from a 3.5-pound loaf, costing about 11 pence in the early 1950s, spread with the cooled, congealed fat left from Sunday's roast. Sometimes, a layer of jelly formed beneath the fat, glinting amber in the weak afternoon light. For some children, this was a treat, the savory tang, the soft bread, the sense of getting something extra when money ran out before payday. Oral histories recall mothers sighing in relief, as bread and dripping carried families through wage gaps when the butcher's bill came due. Others remember the meal as a reminder of what was missing: protein, variety, the promise of better days. Bread consumption hovered around 4 pounds per person each week, a figure that speaks to its role as the fallback when cupboards emptied and options narrowed. In the memory of many, bread and dripping divides opinion, fondly recalled by those who saw it as a small pleasure, quietly resented by those who saw it as evidence of poverty. Yet in the long cold of British winters, it offered pure energy and a kind of solidarity, a simple meal that bound families together in both want and resilience. Number 9. Rabbit stew once simmered at the heart of winter kitchens, its aroma a mingling of wild game and slow-cooked vegetables. For working-class families in the years before 1953, rabbit was the meat of necessity, sold for less than a shilling each at market stalls, or brought home after a day's trapping in the fields. Housewives knew how to stretch a single carcass, jointed and browned in a battered enamel pot, then stewed for hours with onions, carrots, and the last of the autumn potatoes. National Food Survey records from 1952 show that rabbit made up 5% of meat intake among poor households, a figure that speaks to both its affordability and its ubiquity. Children recall the thrill of finding a tender leg beneath thick gravy, while mothers prized rabbit for its mild flavor and the way it filled bellies when nothing else could be spared. Yet all this changed almost overnight. In the autumn of 1953, myxomatosis swept across Britain, carried by wind-borne insects from the continent and leaving devastation in its wake. The wild rabbit population collapsed by more than 99%, and market supplies vanished almost as quickly. Prices spiked, but the real toll was measured in empty traps and silent fields. Oral histories tell of rural families searching in vain, and urban shoppers watching once crowded stalls stand bare by 1955. The loss was more than protein. It was a rupture in the fragile balance of post-war survival. Where rabbit stew had once bridged the gap between scarcity and sufficiency, its disappearance left kitchens to rely on even leaner options. In memory, the dish carries a note of mourning, a reminder of how quickly a staple can vanish, and how vulnerable even the most familiar foods are to forces beyond the kitchen door. In the 10th place, tripe and onions marked the end of the savory spectrum, a dish as divisive as it was defining in the industrial North. Boiled cow stomach lining, pale and honeycombed, arrived at Manchester's market stalls by dawn, ready for the day's trade. The city's streets once supported a dense cluster of tripe shops and cafes. At its height, the United Cattle Products chain alone counted 146 outlets and a dozen restaurants scattered across the northwest, their tiled facades and steamy windows a fixture of urban life. Beneath this retail surface ran a specialized trade. Tripe dressers began work before sunrise, bleaching, scraping, and simmering raw tripe in tiled back rooms, the sharp tang of bleach and steam clinging to aprons and skin. Health inspectors, armed with the latest regulations of the 1960s, patrolled these shops regularly, their ledgers recording both the resilience and decline of the trade as hygiene costs and supermarket competition mounted. For many working men, dockers, mill hands, pensioners, a plate of tripe and onions was prized for its protein and price, costing just 4 pence per pound in the early 1950s. They queued on Saturdays, swapping gossip as tripe simmered with onions, vinegar, and a pinch of salt. Yet for children, the dish often meant dread. The texture and smell lingered in memory long after the last bite. School canteens reinforced its reputation, serving up plates that divided opinion and appetite. As tastes modernized and offal lost its place at the center of winter tables, the tripe shops faded. Their disappearance marked more than a culinary shift. It signaled the end of a city's occupational foodways, the closing of an urban ecosystem that once thrived on thrift, hard work, and the promise that nothing from the animal would go to waste. Number 11, rice pudding brought the sweet comfort of milk back to British tables, blooming in kitchens across the country after rationing finally lifted in 1954. The scent of vanilla and nutmeg drifted from enamel baking dishes, promising warmth at the end of a long winter meal. With milk and sugar suddenly abundant, families returned to this creamy dessert in droves. By 1955, nearly 70% of households were serving rice pudding at least once a week, a figure anchored in National Food Survey records. The ritual was simple: short grain rice, a splash of whole milk, a spoonful of sugar, and a slow oven. Children waited for the golden skin to form on top, some arguing it was the best part, a chewy crown of caramelized milk, while others dreaded its rubbery stretch and begged for the soft layer beneath. The debate over the skin divided kitchens as sharply as any schoolyard rivalry, yet the pudding itself was a constant. In homes where variety was rare and indulgence measured by the spoonful, rice pudding offered a gentle monotony, a reassurance that there would always be enough for seconds, even if the flavor never changed. The dish marked a turning point. Milk, once rationed and precious, now poured freely, transforming a handful of rice into an emblem of post-war recovery. For many, the memory of rice pudding lingers as both comfort and repetition, the taste of ordinary days made sweeter by the simple fact of plenty. Number 12. Bread and butter pudding turned stale bread from an afterthought into the heart of family dessert. The ritual began with thinly sliced, days-old bread, never wasted, always repurposed, layered with a smear of margarine and scattered dried fruit. The kitchen would fill with the vanilla-sweet scent of custard, poured slowly over the bread and left to soak for 20 minutes, softening the crusts and coaxing new life from scraps. In the early 1950s, official voices joined the chorus. The BBC's Kitchen Front broadcast home economists urging listeners to save every crumb, calling bread and butter pudding the best way to stop bread being wasted. Ministry of Food pamphlets echoed the advice, and transcripts from 1951 describe the dish as a family favorite in homes up and down the country. By 1956, over 60% of households made bread puddings weekly, a figure drawn from National Food Survey reviews and oral histories. Mothers adapted the recipe to suit what was at hand. Currants, if there were any, a dusting of nutmeg, or just plain sugar if times were tight. Children waited for the golden, caramelized top, sometimes fighting for the corner slice where custard pooled thickest. For fathers, the pudding marked the end of a long week, a comfort born from thrift, proof that nothing in the kitchen need ever go to waste. The memory lingers as both sweetness and lesson, a reminder that official encouragement for frugality could be transformed in the right hands into warmth and satisfaction at the family table. Number 13. Apple crumble brought a sense of modest luxury to post-war kitchens, promising sweetness even when supplies ran thin. The scent of stewed apples and cinnamon drifted from oven doors, cutting through the damp of British winters. Unlike rich pies, crumble relied on thrift, a topping of flour, a scant spoonful of margarine, and just enough sugar to crisp under heat. Housewives reached for windfall apples or bruised fruit, stretching each piece with a handful of oats or breadcrumbs when flour ran short. By 1960, the National Food Survey recorded that 80% of households baked fruit puddings weekly, a testament to the dish's enduring appeal despite ongoing austerity. Children waited for the first spoonful, watching the golden crust break to reveal bubbling fruit beneath, always served with a ladle of hot custard. For many, apple crumble marked the shift from heavy, suet-laden sweets to lighter, more hopeful desserts. It stood at the crossroads of necessity and pleasure, a dish that made do with little, yet felt like a treat. In memory, its tart, sweet aroma lingers as proof that even in lean years, British kitchens found room for comfort and celebration. Number 14. Jam roly-poly brought a sense of childish delight to the British winter table, even as its heavy suet roll weighed down many a school lunch tray. Steamed until soft and pale, the pudding unfurled to reveal a sticky core of red jam, often raspberry or plum, whatever was to hand from the pantry shelf. The first slice, oozing with syrupy sweetness, sent a plume of steam into the air, promising comfort on the chilliest days. In the mid-1950s, households received around 12 ounces of dried fruit each month, a figure that shaped which jams appeared in the center, currant, sultana, or whatever ration books allowed. School canteens served thick slabs of roly-poly, sometimes drowned in thin custard, sometimes left to cool and congeal before reaching the table. Children remember the pudding as both a treat and a trial. The sticky jam clinging to fingers, the suet dough sitting heavy in the stomach, the peculiar taste of institutional kitchens that lingered all afternoon. At home, mothers rolled the dough tightly, spreading jam to the very edges, then wrapped it in cloth and set it to steam above bubbling pots. The ritual of slicing, spooning, and sharing marked the end of a long day, a brief moment when sweetness broke through the monotony of root vegetables and reheated stews. Jam roly-poly stands as a memory of both abundance and austerity, its scent and texture forever tied to the echoing halls of post-war schools and the quiet pride of home kitchens, preparing for the syrup-laden finale that always seemed just out of reach. And finally, in 15th place, treacle sponge pudding offered a golden coda to the winter table, the scent of syrup and steam rising as a promise of comfort after weeks of thrift. The ritual began with a thick pour of golden syrup, Tate and Lyle's tins stacked in larders, their lion logo as familiar as the sound of the kettle. Housewives would line a pudding basin with syrup, then pack in a soft, pale sponge made from flour, eggs, and a little margarine, tying a cloth tight before setting it to steam for hours above a bubbling pot. By the mid-1960s, golden syrup had become a staple of British kitchens, its sticky sweetness woven into countless desserts and everyday treats. Magazine adverts and cinema reels from Tate and Lyle painted syrup as a symbol of post-rationing pleasure, an affordable luxury that brightened the greyest months. Children watched, noses pressed to the glass, as the pudding was turned out, amber syrup cascading down the sides, pooling on chipped plates. The first spoonful clung to lips and fingers, a taste so sweet it seemed to erase the memory of boiled cabbage and suet. Oral histories recall the hush that fell as pudding was served, mothers doling out slices with a warning not to burn tongues. For many, treacle sponge pudding became the flavor of celebration, a rare treat that marked birthdays, holidays, or simply the end of a hard week. In the memory of post-war Britain, it stands as the final word on resilience, a dish that transformed simple pantry staples into a moment of pure, sticky joy, lingering long after the last plate was scraped clean. Across all 15 entries, from the basic comfort of beef stew with root vegetables to the vanished tradition of rabbit stew, this list has traced the forgotten backbone of British winter dinners from the 1950s through the 1970s. The most surprising entries, like bread and dripping or tripe and onions, highlight just how far households stretched every ingredient. Consistent patterns emerge: thrift, resourcefulness, and a reliance on cheap staples like suet, potatoes, and bread. Many dishes, such as bubble and squeak or bread and butter pudding, were born from a zero-waste mindset, while others, like corned beef hash, exposed the nation's dependence on global imports. Our ranking focused on familiarity, prevalence, and the role each dish played in everyday survival and comfort. Ultimately, these lost dinners reveal not just changing tastes, but how scarcity shaped resilience and creativity in British kitchens. They remind us that food history isn't just about recipes, but about the social and economic realities that defined an era.